Good evening. As Mr. Haria comes up, we'll go through and just frame. We have quite a bit of information for you all this evening. This is the main item that we have on the board agenda, recognizing that we will take time with this as well too. And so if we can go to the next slide. We've put this in 3 different sections. So part 1, Mr. Haria will be going over the summary of the state's budget and the impact on our district and going through what COLA means and what it actually meant for our district as well, the impact of enrollment and average daily attendance, and some of the one-time funds summary. I'll be reviewing the guiding principles that we've used that our community, the board, our everyone shares in terms of how we approach budgeting and reductions and how we've applied those to the actual recommended reductions. And those reductions I will review in non-personnel, personnel, budget shifts, and then a summary. You are welcome to ask questions throughout any time during the presentation, and then we'll have discussion and direction at the end as well too, but feel free to ask for clarity or anything that you want us to review. And those will be the 3 sections as well. The presentation is uploaded in both English and Spanish for anyone watching as well. Thank you. And I'll turn it over to Mr. Haria.
Mr. Haria, before you do begin, just to ensure the orderly questioning, if you do have a question, if you can just let me know and then we'll call on you so that way then we can ask the questions if we'll be asking them throughout the presentation. Okay? All right, Mr. Haria, thank you.
Thank you. So we'll start off with some definitions, just setting some context for where we are. And I'm looking at advancing. There we go. So the first thing I'd like to start off is something called MYP. And, just to set the context, I've worked in 5 different states across the United States, and every state is a little bit different. In California specifically, when we do a school budget, we are required to do a 3-year budget, and it's called a multi-year projection. And all those 3 years have to be balanced in order for it to meet approval standards from the state. So MYP stands for multi-year projections, and that's what California school districts have to do. There's over 1,000 school districts in California. We all have to do the same thing as we submit budgets for approval. COLA, it's not Coca-Cola, but it stands for Cost of Living Adjustment. And it's the amount of money that the state gives every year, which increases your budget, but it's by per pupil. And I'll go through what COLA means from the state, but also what it means at the local level, because we don't necessarily get all the same percentage that flows through if someone were to calculate that. So I'll show how that looks. Step in column is not a raise, but we do pay that every year as employees advance on the salary schedule. And for us right now, the cost per year is 1.5%. So that's an automatic cost increase to the district that we have to pay for. Our health benefit contribution, so we pay 100% of the Kaiser rates. And, as of January, our rates increased by 11%. So because we pay 100%, our employees have already seen a benefit in their January paychecks. Anywhere, from, if it's a single employee, from $1,284 to an employee with a full family that's benefiting from the medical plan up to $3,348 annually. As a school district, we get money based on the students we have in terms of enrollment, but also average daily attendance. In addition to that, some other funds we received are called one-time funds. They're there, it's only temporary, and there are specific purposes that we can utilize those funds for. We're also the beneficiary of a parcel tax from our community here in Pittsburgh. That parcel tax expires in June of 2024, so in a couple of months, and can only be utilized for arts, music, and athletics. So that just sets some context and some definitions as we're moving forward. So let's talk about where we are and how did we get to where we are with the budget. So the first thing you'll see on top is the state COLA. And when the governor comes with the budget for the state, they announce what the COLA is going to be over the next couple of years. So in that first graphic that you see on the top, in January 2024, when the governor's budget came out, the COLA for next year is projected to be 0.76%. Now, when the state adopted their budget, it's called the enacted budget last year, in June of 2023, the COLA for next year was projected to be 3.94%. So really, the revenue for next year is going to be going down by 3.1%, 3.18% just on COLA. And then, as I said, we submit a 3-year budget. So the following year in 25-26, there's a reduction of 0.56%. And the following year, 0.08%. And these percentages seem so small, but when you multiply that percentage by $250 million, it's a huge amount of money. So that's the state COLA. Then we have local COLA, and I want to go through this definition very clearly, and I'm going to take you through some examples later in the presentation. Local COLA is the actual additional revenue that the district receives compared to last year after taking into account the state COLA, which we just mentioned above, but also looking locally at our school district, our enrollment, and our average daily attendance. So that's the local COLA. So last year in LCFF, we received $145 million. And for this year's budget, we're projecting to receive $152 million. So if you subtract those two amounts, the difference is $7 million. And when you take the $7 million divided by the $145 million, the actual local COLA is only 4.92%. It's not 8.22, but 4.922 at the local level, 4.92. Now, how do we go ahead and calculate that local COLA? So I'm going to take you through just an example of how we calculate it. Okay, so there's a good few numbers on the slide, and on the right-hand side, there's some explanation as to each of it. So the example I'm going to use is for 22-23. And let's say, for example, we had for 22-23, we had 10,000 students in the school district. And as I said, this is just an example. So if we had 10,000 students, and let's say our average daily attendance was 95%. So that's, although we have 10,000 students, not all of them come to school every day, right? So if we take 10,000 students multiplied by 95% attendance, we only get funded for 9,500 students, as you'll see in that first line. And we take the 9,500 students and then take the rate that the state pays us for every student, which is $10,099 per student. And that gives you $95.9 million in revenue for that first year. Then, people talk about, hey, but you received 8.22% COLA. You should, that should be how much more you got from last year. Let me take you through the example of how the state calculates, or at the local level, what we actually get paid based on that state COLA. So for 23-24, utilizing the same example we've done for 22-23, except we have some declining enrollment by about 100 students. So that gives it, instead of 10,000 students, it's now 9,900 students. Then from average daily attendance, we got, a little bit more of a decline, and our attendance is only 92%. So it's, how would we calculate the COLA for that year? It's 9,900 students. Multiply that by 92% attendance, gives you 9,108 students that are funded. Then you look at the rate. The rate in 22-23 was $10,099 per student. We apply the full COLA to that because that's what we're getting. So it's $10,099 times that by 8.2% increase gives us $10,900 per student now. But we're only being funded on 9,108 students. So we take 9,108, multiply it with the full COLA included, which is 8.22, gives you a total of $99.5 million of revenue, right? So when you look at the change in revenue from the prior year, in the prior year, we had $95 million. In this year, we have $99 million. When you subtract the two, it adds up to, when you subtract the two, the difference is $3.6 billion. You take the $3.6 million divided by the 95 million, gives you 3.8%. So although we received a 8.22% COLA per student, because we have lower students in terms of enrollment, and because we have lower average daily attendance, the actual difference in revenue year on year in this example was 3.8%. And so for our school district, when we calculate that, there was 4.92%. And that's what the difference is between the state COLA of the state giving us 8.22% per student, but based on what we have here at PUSD, and every school district is different, based on their enrollment, based on their average daily attendance, the local COLA, how much money you're actually receiving that's different from last year, is a much lower percentage.
Now, Mr. Haria, that's a lower percentage, assuming lower enrollment numbers and lower ADA, right? And that could actually be different depending if, let's say, enrollment increases and ADA were to increase.
This is absolutely true.
Okay, thank you.
So now I'd like to talk about, thank you, the components that make up the COLA. So we spoke about the state COLA, which was the 8.22% for this fiscal year, but then we also look at enrollment and our average daily attendance. In terms of enrollment, our enrollment at first interim was projected to go down by 153 students. Now we have received projections for next year from our demographer, and that's showing a 216 student decline over the next 2 years. And then the model projection shows a 62 student increase from prior years. So when you see what we're going to bring back in March, we are utilizing the first interim projection at this stage with 153 students. But this directly impacts our local COLA because we have the declining enrollment. And as Mr. Moreno said, if our enrollment goes up, we would expect that our revenue would also increase. But that's what we're projecting at this stage. The second component of calculating the local COLA is average daily attendance. And this chart you see is from School Services of California. And so they have the chart divided into 3 areas. One is for elementary school districts, the other one is for high school districts, and the orange is for unified school districts. In the, if we were to look at the state's average daily attendance pre-COVID for elementary school districts, it was 95.6%. And then for unified school districts, it was 94.75%. The state's average daily attendance for 22-23, so that's last year, was 91.2%. So that's from the state side. Let's have a look at what's happening at PUSD. Pre-COVID, our average daily attendance was 94.75%. And then for last year, it was 89.5%. This year, currently, it's at 91.2%. And so it's grown, and there's a lot of work being done on making sure that we are improving attendance. But ADA currently is at 91.2%.
And then one point I want to make too is that the state during the pandemic did give us a grace period, so to speak, for average daily attendance. But that period is over. And so that's why we're feeling this impact even more. And you can see everyone in the state is feeling this as well too, because the average daily attendance in the state is not back to where it was pre-COVID, just like ours is not back to where it was pre-COVID. But we don't have that grace period anymore. Now we have to put in our real-time average daily attendance, that average for that.
Then as we look at those ADA projections, we looked at some different scenarios, and these projections include our collective bargaining, for this year. And so at the 91.2%, we would have a shortfall of $20.4 million. At 92.5%, it's $17.3 million. And 93.5%, the shortfall would be $14.9 million. So now that we've spoken about the components of our local COLA, the other type of funds that we receive are one-time funds. And one-time funds are exactly that. They're birthday money that comes one time around, that can only be utilized for the purpose that is specified, when they give us that one-time money. So we were the recipient of ESSER 3 funds, I think to the tune of about $17 million. That expires in September of 2024, which is pretty soon, and that contains some one-time positions in there. The next large chunk of funding, and you'll see our fund balances when we present second interim as well, is the Learning Recovery Block Grant, and that expires only in September of 2028. But we'll be fully spending that by 2026 because it's in our current budget and contains positions that helps out for the next 2 years. The next one is the Arts Music Instruction Block Grant that expires in June of 2026. And that's also got some budget and current staffing plans. And we have one-time positions that continue in those Arts Music Instruction Block Grant, and those will expire in 2026 when the funding expires. Then we have parcel tax, as I said, that can only be utilized for arts, music, and athletics, and that expires in June of 2024. We will have some carryover funding from that, and that will help us support through some expenses, and there's some positions in there through 24-25. When we plan big purchases in the school district or even in life, when you have a big purchase to make and you look at what you make on a monthly basis or what you make on an annual basis, when you're making that big ticket purchase, you can't necessarily afford it all at one time. So what you do is you save some money over a period of time to be able to afford that large purchase. So when you look at our ending fund balance, and let's utilize the lottery as an example, right? We utilize the lottery specifically to purchase instructional materials such as our textbooks. And when we do large adoptions, that's what we utilize our lottery money for. So we've got $2.6 million we receive $2.6 million in lottery every year in restricted and unrestricted. And so when we're thinking of lottery, we did not do anything. We were going to do a physics adoption in 22-23, but we carried over that. And so we're currently doing a math adoption with those carryover funds. And our total textbooks, when you think about that over the next 3 years in the MYP, they'll all be utilized by June of 2024. We're looking at the math adoption, the world language adoption, physics, ELD, supplemental materials, and all of that totals up $4.1 million. So that's why we have to save some money in that ending fund balance in the lottery over a period of time in order to make those big purchases, as you see, $4.1 million at one time possible. So what may look like a large ending fund balance, really, it's because we're putting money aside to be able to do those big purchases when we need to do them.
Would another example be also with the one-time funds, because we want to keep the positions as long as possible, they may be in one funding source now, but we have what looks like ending fund balance, but that we're using next year because the funding source expires this year. We don't want to lose those positions, so we put them into the next funding source. So it'll look that much less next year because they will be positions in that one. And then for 25, 26. Is that a fair way of explaining that as well too? In terms of, because it can look like there is this larger amount, but there's a purpose to it.
And, going back to what I said earlier on about the multi-year projection, we do a 3-year budget. So in terms of shifting those funds, while you may see a large ending fund balance in 1 year, you actually got to look at those funds over a period of that MYP, and you'll actually see year on year we're utilizing, creatively moving things around so we can continue with operations and with keeping those people so they can continue educating our students. So next, let's move on to our salary comparison. And so this chart is an adaptation from School Services of California. They produce a report called the Salary and Benefits Report, SABRI in short, and they get information from all the school districts, and all the school districts submit something called the J90 to the state. And so they collect all that information and then they analyze all that information. So when we look at the surrounding school districts just in our area and just the largest school districts, I know there's probably 18 or 19 school districts in this area. But, you know, when we look at Pittsburgh and we look at 3 different data points, one is a bachelor's plus 30. The next is a bachelor's plus 60. And the third point is the maximum salary schedule. So you'll see Pittsburgh being the first graphic compared to Antioch, compared to San Ramon, and compared to Mount Diablo. And so you'll see there that we in the top third in terms of salaries and benefits in Contra Costa County. And when you also not mention this graph is, you know, over the past 10 years, we've paid over 40% in additional salaries. That's not benefits, just in additional salaries. So very competitive. And you can see these numbers are from 22, 23, you know, but they do show that we're in the top third in terms of compensation, especially compared to the larger school districts in the county.
And if you want to see all the districts in the county, we've attached that chart to this board item as well, too. We pulled out the largest unified school districts for the comparison for this presentation, but we have the full county comparison attached to this agenda item as well.
So salary is one component. This next component is benefits. So let's talk a little bit more about benefits. And so we are fortunate in the school district to have 100% district paid benefits. And so we provide 100% of the Kaiser rate for medical, from individual all the way to family. Then we also provide fully paid benefits for dental and fully paid benefits for vision. And so when you look at this, the first line in there looks at the 2024 rates. And those rates went in effect on the 1st of January, 2024. And just on those medical rates, we experienced, 11% increase. And families already, or employees rather, already received this benefit because it's 100% paid in their January paychecks. They did not see this increase for the cost increase because it's 100% paid by the district. So they experienced the benefit of it, but they did not see their paychecks go down because that's 100% fully paid district benefit. Then you compare to the 2023 rates, and what you'll see there is that, if you were an employee only, you're already getting an annual increase of $1,292. An employee plus one, $2,500. And an employee plus two or employee plus family, $3,300 that's already getting into your paycheck because you don't have to pay for those increased funds, for benefits. And that's about, for family, it's about $279 per month in terms of an increase. So ranging from employee single at 107 going up to 279. But when you think about it and you say to yourself, if you had an employee or a teacher earning $70,000 a year, their salary is almost over $100,000 because the benefits for family alone, when you look at it, $33,000 a year. So if you were to take that example and say $70,000 salary plus $33,000 just in health benefits, that's beside our pension costs and those kinds of things, that's over $100,000. So pretty significant benefit that we have. And Again, because we've said it's 100% district paid, any fluctuation, any increase, we have to fully absorb in our budget to be able to afford that.
Mr. Haria, I have a question if you can hear me.
Yes.
So I just wanted to clarify, going back to the benefits, medical, dental, and vision, 100% district paid. Just for my understanding, I understand that we are covering 100% of the benefits for the employees, but are we covering partial benefits for families or full benefits for families of employees as well?
It's full coverage. So we have the employee only. We have the employee plus one other person in their family, or employee plus two or more, which is the employee plus the entire family. We cover the full range up to the family as well.
Okay, thank you.
With that being said, I'll move on to the next slide, which is the guiding principles.
So whenever we look at any kind of reductions, we all recognize that it is painful. Everyone is in agreement that public education does not get funded in the way that it should. Everyone is in agreement that our hardworking employees do not get funded the way that they should. That is the way our state funding works. Unfortunately, we have two things that are really driving our lower state funding. One is the reduced COLA that Mr. Haria went over. So again, we have to budget for 3 years. Last year when we did our budget for 3 years, then the 24-25 COLA was going to be 3.5% something. Now we're told it's going to be 0.76. It may even get lower, but we have to absorb that decrease. The other that really impacts us is the average daily attendance. That is because our attendance is not back to where it was, just like across the state, it isn't as well either. We're continuing to work on that, but that impacts significantly the funding that we receive. And then the third factor that we've known about all along is the one-time funds. We know that those funds were given to us by the state and federal government during the pandemic. They were for additional services during and post-pandemic, but they do expire. We also know that many of those services or positions that we have, we value and want to maintain. So we have to have a plan of how we can do that within this time as well, too. So in making these things and making these decisions and recommendations to bring forward, we look at what are the guiding principles that we have used, what drives us as a district, what has the board communicated over the years around what's important. So one is always keeping our students at the center, keeping them in mind of what is best for our students, and keeping the services for our students as long as possible. So the services that happen outside the classroom, example. It's always been very important to keep all of our current employees as long as possible as well, and maintain a competitive total compensation. So that's why we wanted to show you where we are in that comparison with other districts, because we are maintaining that competitive compensation. We have to follow law. We have to follow compliance. We have to follow and honor our labor contracts. We need to maintain fiscal solvency. Nobody, most of all me, maybe more so you all as board members, want the state to come in and manage our budgets, as we have seen happen in districts. So we have to be mindful of that and make sure that we're never in a situation. This board has passed a resolution to allow us to use the board reserve as needed to protect positions. So that's included as well, too. This board passed that resolution in about 2018 when we were doing reductions, and has maintained it throughout. So we're required by law to have a 3% reserve. Most districts have a board reserve on top of that for emergencies. And we did have that board reserve, but our board has passed a resolution that allows us to use that reserve to hang on to more positions or add to when we don't have an ending fund balance, when we want to make sure that we can contribute to that amount. So that's in there as well too. And then we always look at the feedback mostly through our LCOP surveys and different ways that our parents and families and teachers and staff have given us feedback about what they value. So for example, we know our parents always value safety. That comes up number one as well. Our DLAC parents were all about us having elementary counselors, right? So that was something that they really valued and needed that service in there as an example. So keeping all of those things in mind, I want to review what's included in the recommendations that I'm bringing forward. So based on those guiding principles that I just reviewed, what's included in the proposed budget recommendation for reductions? One, the cost for step and column so that we can maintain our commitments. We've budgeted in a 3% ongoing salary increase for all employees retroactive to July 1, 2023. That is the amount that we budgeted in order to plan for this as well too, and in order to remain competitive. It is not the amount that we have settled on, but we obviously need to plan for our budgets. We've budgeted in the increased healthcare costs. Mr. Haria just reviewed what that meant to our district. It ends up being about the equivalent of a 1.6 increase in salary when you look at that. We have budgeted in the reduced COLA for 2024, 2025, and 2025, 2026 as of the current information we have now. That could change in May. It may change for the worse. We always want it to change for the better, but we've all heard the news about the state. We don't expect it to be too much better. And we've based this on an average daily attendance of 92.5% and the first interim enrollment. And this is what's been very challenging is because our average daily attendance is down, we're actually at 91.9 or so, 91.2 right now. So, but we wanted to budget on 92.5%. If we budget on where we were pre-pandemic and we don't get there, it puts us in a situation where we would have mid-year really large cuts. So we need to look at what we think is reasonable. If we go above that, fantastic, right? But we need to make sure that we're being responsible and planning thoughtfully. And it also contains the board's contribution of the board reserve and the MYP. So that's already factored in these proposed reductions. Also based on our guiding principles, with this proposed reduction and budget plan, no current classified or certificated, so no current CSEA or PEA employee who is employed with us at this moment would lose their job. There's one caveat is that our school sites have budgets that they are allowed to select sites or select positions or do hiring with. And some of our school sites may still be in the process of deciding whether or not they're funding a position. That is we do school site allocations in our district. So that is their purview to decide that. That may result, if they reduce a position, that may result in bumping. But so far, we don't know of any that may happen. And we will always look to offer an open position. But in what I'm recommending, nobody would lose a position next year. Safety and mental health services remain. And it also protects our funds for the textbook adoptions that Mr. Haria mentioned, and also saving up for our technology replacement. We have a commitment to one-to-one technology. I think our scholars have gotten used to having those Chromebooks. We want them to be proficient in technology. We use it. Our teachers use it as well too, but we do not have a private foundation supporting that one-to-one technology like Napa Valley Foundation has across their whole county, because that's something that they've done for years. So we have to put money aside every year to make sure that we're able to replace in real time when we need Chromebooks, but also when the entire fleet of Chromebooks expires, we need to replace them. And then we'll have our professional development that will continue and also, but our professional development will be narrowed. We will lose some of our professional development and we will focus on our math with our new math adoption. It keeps our early literacy professional development and our commitments to having our teachers for our students who are teach our English language learners and for our supports for students with disabilities. So it remains intact for that. Positions and one-time funds are under this plan are budgeted to continue for 2 more years. But remember, these or their equivalent will have to be reduced or brought into ongoing funding before the end of the 25-26 school year. So again, we had money at the end and we have in our ending fund balance, that money, some of it goes into next year to make sure those positions continue. Some of it goes into 25-26 to then make sure those positions continue because we want to have them as long as we can in our district. And I'm going to give you a couple examples of what's in those one-time funds. These are not numbers. I don't have it, but just to give you an example, we have some of our elementary CRAs that are in there, our campus resource. We have some of the additional secondary campus resource assistants that we've hired. We have some of our elementary counselors. We were able to go from about 2 hours of nursing a day to full-time nursing. So that is made up for in those one-time funds. We have some of our teachers on special assignment who provide the early literacy supports. We have some behaviorists, some aides, and a couple of our music teachers from the parcel tax. So we have to plan how to bring those folks in over the next couple of years to ongoing funds as well too, and or make those reductions. So I just wanted to give you some examples of what those types of positions are. Now, just because someone or a person or a position is in one time, doesn't mean that that's the position that would be reduced. It could be an equivalent amount from somewhere else. That's where we would have to really look at what do we want to keep when that time comes, if we're not able to move them all into ongoing funding, which is always the goal. So here are the recommendations based on all of that. So this is just a summary chart. You will see the top part with the 10.5 million. That's where we have some of that carryover. Why do we have LCAP carryover? Well, for 2 reasons. We received one-time funds, right, from the federal and state. They have expiration dates. So we use some things to pay for in one-time funds so that we could carry over LCAP funds and have our budget last longer, if you think of it that way. So it's again, long-term planning to make the most over our budget. So within that, that's a perfect example in 26-27 where we could move some of those positions for one-time funds in that or earlier if we receive more in our LCFF than projected. We have the lottery carryover. Again, as Mr. Hari explained, we get about 2.6 million every year. We saved up until we knew what the costs were going to be for our textbook adoptions. After we draw all of our textbook adoptions for this year down, we'll have that amount that we can contribute. Next year, our lottery money will go for our social studies adoption. The year after, we will put that lottery money towards our technology replacement as well. We have some savings from ESSER from one-time funds, and I really want to shout out our maintenance and operations team. The board knows some of the grants or different pieces that have come through where we've been able to take advantage and get like our HVAC upgraded or some of the energy pieces. So that's allowed us to save some money with that. We also didn't continue to buy as many of the PPE that we needed at first when we were with the pandemic. And then technology replacement. We've been saving money every year for technology. We're going to take half of that and contribute to this and then use our lottery funds to make that match. And so that's where we have that kind of planning. And this is planning that we started because we knew that we were always going to be in this situation. Not as bad as it is now because we didn't know the COLA was going to drop so much, but we knew we had one-time funds. We knew these things. So this is where we planned to keep services in place as long as possible. And then as we drop down, there'll be some non-personnel reductions, some personnel and non-personnel where I'm shifting them. We're shifting them to another budget source that may be ongoing or also may be temporary. So let me go into detail on those. So non-personnel, I want to thank the Pittsburgh Police Department, knowing of our situation, knowing of the increased costs that we have for traffic, for our crossing guards. The chief has committed to no change in the services that we get from Pittsburgh Police Department, but lowering what they will charge us every year. We get that is for our school resource officers and of course all the coverage that they don't charge us for already for the games when we see them out and about at the football games, those types of things. So we're going to reduce coaching that our administrators, we had some of our newer administrators receive coaching. We'll reduce that and use those funds for our other professional development. We have enjoyed, I explained how we just went to the California Association of Bilingual Education. Our people have been able to go to conferences. It's very important. We've had professional development, robust professional development in our district. We will lessen that. And we will reduce contracted services for mentoring that we have at our school sites. We will look at the ones that have had the most impact, positive impact on our scholars, and see where we will reduce other ones that maybe are not getting the impact that we want. And then maintenance and operations is doing reductions of about 250,000. You have seen some of the contracts come through, but as we've been hiring more people, we're less reliant on those contracted services and able to reduce that cost. Yes, Dr. Woolridge.
I guess going back to the other one, is there opportunities like in the principal PLC or a PD that you guys do to have that where more experienced principals might be able to take someone under their wing and kind of give some feedback and support, or maybe like having district administrators who've been former principals be able to in addition beyond like the evaluating, like take on that coaching, so that way it's not like it's just like X'd out, but it's still a alternative plan to get that coaching done.
We always work with our administrators as much as we can. So absolutely. But I want to be realistic, because we are lean. So we always work with our administrators in a coaching role. We organize our principals meetings as they are professional developments to learn and share from each other. But in terms of current, staff taking on like a one-on-one type coaching role, probably not to that same degree, but we will absolutely continue to, support. Our principals are wonderful at sharing practices, at supporting each other. I think the way that we've organized our meetings, the way that the Ed Services team has worked with them allows that. And we'll be doing more walkthroughs as we are in our equity walkthrough training and being at each other's sites. And so those activities really lend themselves to a lot of that professional growth too.
Okay.
So the whole amount isn't for the multi-year projection because some of these are like one-time savings. So that's why you see a total amount and then the budget impact amount. Personnel reductions. So in looking at our current enrollment and our FTE, that's full-time equivalent, we will look at about 5 that we're able to decrease across our school system. So in some schools, we need to add a teacher because their enrollment has grown, and in some, they absorb a teacher. When it says attrition, that means that we do that when someone we know is leaving at a school. We look and say, do we need to replace this or not? So it's, again, not anyone losing a job. It's saying, are we going to fill this open position next year or not? And we've been doing that across the years. And that's one of the reasons why we've been able to have a relatively stable budget over the years with a lot of services and competitive compensation. Why it's been hectic, is because we do in other places, because we do long-term planning and we do look at that attrition. We have 3 positions that weren't filled this year and they weren't filled not because we couldn't find people, but because we didn't end up with the enrollment needing those positions. So that's in there. We have had a really tough time filling open positions for our parent and family liaisons. So we see that we're going to have our current employed who are with us, our current parent and family liaisons remain. And then we'll work with the team to see what's going to make the most sense for doing those services versus continually trying to hire and people leave after a month or so. And then we also have a custodian. So that will be services that we will reduce in that sense. Again, they're current open positions, no employees that are in those positions. Ed services will be looking and bring a more detailed reduction to you next week, but looking at a reduction there. And then our ed tech mentors, we will look at that reduction as well. And then that gives you the total personnel reductions and then what that would be across the MYP. And then personnel and non-personnel shift to other funding sources. So these are current services we have that we're taking off of the LCAP or general fund, which is where most of our people are, right? And giving them, doing those services at through a different funding source that we have. And so college and career will be shifted over. We can shift over some of those activities. We have some arts positions that will qualify under the new Prop 28 funding. So we'll be able to do that, that qualify, because not some existing positions don't qualify, but if you're adding on additional positions that can qualify. So for example, Pittsburgh High School had a lot of interest in art and they added on additional sections. Those additional sections then qualify. We have a garden supervisor that has been in our LCAP, and we will be shifting that responsibility to our Child Nutrition Services Fund. And then here we're looking at our library media specialists in our elementary schools, shifting their time. And again, we'll consult with CSEA, but shifting their time so that they provide services for an hour after school when we have our after school programs or for scholars that want to stay after school. This will allow us to use the after school funds. Again, they're only designated for after school. So it is a place where we have some budget room. We have not been able to use all of those funds, but we can only use them for after school. So it allows us to have some services and also have part of that salary be paid for after school. And then same thing with some of our contracted services for therapist or Mindful Life, looking at can they provide some of that in the after school hours and not during the academic school day and offset some of the costs that way. And then that's the same summary that I showed you there before we went through. So there's the same summary. And so really it's the time for discussion, questions, recommendations. A couple points that I want to make sure everyone is aware of. So any reductions in personnel by law that require a layoff notice. So what I brought before you right now, we don't have any people who are being laid off in that sense, right? But any reductions that would require a layoff notice must be made by March 15th. And that's for all of our employees, classified and certificated. We've always operated in that way, but now it's actually the law for classified as well too. So that means next week at the March 6th board meeting, we would need to bring those to you if there's going to be any. Any reductions that we would do after that would have to be through attrition. Somebody leaves and we move their equivalent position into an open spot, reduce, things like that. Anything beyond what I've presented today. I know at the last board meeting, we talked about enrollment and projections, and the board did give guidance about using the conservative enrollment. It would require another 1 million in reductions. And so in really looking at our enrollment closely and even talking with Mr. Haria, who's pretty conservative when it comes to the enrollment and project, we felt like we could do it with what we presented in the first interim. And so that's what's reflected in the reductions today. If our ADA does not go up, from the 92.5%, we will need to do further reductions. If our ADA does go up, then I would recommend we use that increase to start moving those one-time positions into ongoing funding. But we will always bring that for the board to consider, but just to kind of offset those increases. And again, if the state budget for schools worsens when the final budget is given to us in June, then we will need to make additional reductions in those out years, and we will do that planning next year as well too. And just timelines again, March 6th is when we would bring this for action. And if there's also any personnel reductions added on, the second interim is due. That is a state date. So Mr. Hari will bring the second interim. The state budget will be given to us in June. We hope they should. That's the state legislators' budget. We will turn in our budget starting with 24-25, and that is due in June. And we do that with our LCAP process. And then into next year, we'll continue that reduction process and thinking about how we can move any of the one-time positions into ongoing funding.
Thank you, Dr. Schultz.